getting right into it, this is my scene. And my scene consists of these two ledges, which my ball and tail is going to jump across. And it consists of a null along with the ball and the tail. The purpose of the null is simply so that I can control everything at the same time without having to key individual pieces, as well as still having the control and the flexibility to move those pieces by themselves. So as you can see, I'm able to rotate the tail independently of the ball, and I'm then also able to scale and rotate the ball independently of the tail, while still being able to move the entire thing as one solid mass. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make this little ball kind of enter the screen and encounter the gap, take a little bit of a run up, you can call it that, and jump over and land on the other side. The very first thing I'm going to do is literally just move the ball. I'm going to start with the null or the controller, key its position at 0. Okay, and by moving the time slider up and changing the position, it will automatically add another keyframe. This particular bounce is going to consist of 3 keyframes: a beginning, a middle or a crest, and an end. Okay, and I'm going to have 2 bounces. You can have as many as you like. Just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to have 2 bounces. You'll notice that when you move the position, After Effects automatically creates a little path, and it sort of looks like a little sine path, like a sine wave, in the sense that it's very curvy and it almost seems like the curves are easing into each other. Now when an object bounces, you typically want that curve or that arc that it moves along to resemble a parabola, which consists of a sharp point at the bottom and a nice smooth curve as it moves up. You can achieve this by selecting the Convert Vertex tool, which you'll find under the Pen tool drop down, and simply clicking on the points. You can use these beziers to adjust the curvature of your path. Feel free to use guides to be a little bit more precise. As you can see, my spacing isn't so great on the second one, so I'm going to just adjust that. Okay, you can move this entire thing by simply selecting all of the keyframes, and with your time slider sitting on one of the keyframes, you can simply move the entire animation and it will not affect any of the keyframes. from that, I'm going to add a little instance of, call it follow through from that movement, just in the form of a little slide. Okay, to add easing, I'm simply going to select all my keyframes, right click, go to keyframe assistant, and then just choose easy ease. You can see the shortcut is F9. One thing I'm going to add is just one little instance of follow through, which I failed to add in the first step. But the beauty of these things is, as you go, you tweak, you add things, you change things, you remove things, and it's just the nature of animation, I suppose. The real magic happens when we use the curve editor. This particular type of graph is called the speed graph, and the y-axis represents the speed of the position transformation, while the x-axis represents time. Okay, and you can see it's measured in pixels per second. All you have to remember about the speed graph is that wherever the crest or the highest point of your curve is, that will be the fastest point of that movement. One good way to remember how the speed graph also works is think of it as a little slope. If your object was sitting at the top of that slope and it rolled down, if it's really sharp, it's going to be fast. And if it's a steady slope, it's obviously going to move a little bit slower. Okay, now because my object is bouncing, we're going to presume that gravity is having an effect on it and it's pulling it down to the ground. Now, when that happens, its fastest speed is going to be right before it hits the ground, and its slowest speed will be right at the top. Okay, and to adjust the speed of your movement, simply move the crest of the curve to whichever side you want it to be fastest at. So by moving the crests towards the keyframes, holding the position at the bottom, you therefore make that movement at that time quicker. You'll also notice that the height and the velocity of the ball's path is relatively the same. And we can justify this because the ball is conscious and is somehow propelling itself through this space. If you have a look at a sort of unconscious ball just falling, you'll notice that each instance or each bounce kind of diminishes in momentum and in height. As it kind of bounces, it loses a little bit of its energy every time. If your ball is conscious, it's obviously somehow capable of propelling itself through space. Okay, so your curve should look something like this, with your fastest point sitting closest to the position on the ground, and your slowest or your steadiest curves sitting closest to the position in the air. One thing you will notice is that there's this funny little pause every time it kind of gets into the air when it reaches its highest position. The reason for that is if you look at the graph, you'll notice that the point at which it sits in the air is right at the bottom of the graph. And basically what that tells the animation to do is that its speed at this point is going to be 0. So you can correct this by simply clicking and dragging those points up, and it should create a relatively seamless movement. Feel free to tweak this as much as you like, in any way you like. And also keep in mind that all of the things we're doing here in this video is not the law. So you'll have your own kind of personal preferences and your own process as you kind of start animating more. But it's a good way to just understand it. So the way I'm approaching this animation is in little bits and pieces. So I'm not keying the entire animation of this ball jumping across and landing. I'm doing it in little bits and pieces. The reason for that is so that I can really get a sense of how this thing is going to move, which will make it a lot easier for me at a later stage. Also, for me personally, I need that gratification, so I need to see that, you know, something is actually coming off this little thing. Otherwise I lose interest very, very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to use my existing keyframes, so this position, as sort of like a guide to animating the rest of the ball. So the tail, which includes the tail's own rotation, and then the ball actually rotating as it moves through space along that path. This is one of the benefits of having the tail being able to move independently from the ball and vice versa. Okay, generally figuring these things out requires a little bit of trial and error. I think this was my third attempt at actually animating this little ball and tail before I kind of got it to look anything like other than complete shit. So just work at it. If it's not working, it's often a good idea to just start again. And that way you'll also become a little bit more acquainted with the process. Doing things over and over again is the best way to learn, actually. So I basically need the tail to follow the path or trail along behind the ball at a later stage than the ball itself. And to do that, I'm simply going to first use the ball as a reference for my rotation. So every time the ball reaches its highest point, I'm simply going to rotate the tail upward, and then vice versa for the lowest point. So every time it reaches its lowest point by touching the ground, I'm going to simply rotate the tail down. Okay, now the tail itself, I'm going to make a little bit more detailed in terms of the kind of movements it's doing than the entire ball. And the benefit of having both of these things rotating, so not just the tail rotating, but the whole thing rotating as it moves, is that it allows us to get very nice kind of overlap at a later stage, which will create a very nice kind of floppy little tail as it bounces along and jumps around. Okay, one last thing I'm going to do is just add a couple of instances of follow through, just in the tail alone. You don't have to overdo these things.
My love, my love,
Okay, and once you're kind of happy with that, you'll have to obviously check the timing once you've added the easing, but go ahead and add the easing. Okay, and for the easing, you can use your position keyframes for the controller as kind of like your reference. So again, select all of your keyframes, hit F9 to ease them, and then go ahead and do your easing.
my love, my love.
Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate kind of the difference between standard or basic easing, so easing out and then into the movement again, and the kind of easing that we did in the first case of the ball actually moving. Okay, so by positioning the crests in the middle, you get a nice kind of ease in and ease out. The sharper that crest is, the more dramatic the difference is. You can see it kind of looks okay. I would prefer it though if it sort of reacted a little bit more to the movement of the ball. So I'm going to kind of mimic the easing that we have in the position values of the ball. So you'll notice that this graph goes up and down along the y-axis, with 0 sitting in the middle. The reason for this is simply because we're working with rotation, and rotation's values, it works with degrees. So anytime you have a negative rotation, so if your circle moves minus 30, it will drop below that 0 line. But just remember, it means exactly the same thing. Okay, again, every single crest is sitting kind of exactly where the bounce would be, except that last one. The last one is basically just there to make our little bit of follow through look a little bit nicer. So it eases into it and out of it. I prefer it to look like this simply because it kind of kind of resembles the initial movement a little bit nicer, which creates a little bit of a stronger action and reaction relationship between those two movements. The tail, however, I'm going to ease normally, so just easing in and out, because it is a little bit further along the kind of the hierarchy. Okay, and I think it's looking quite good at this point. Okay, now that we've got our different layers of movement put in place, now comes the fun part. So this is where you can really watch your animation sort of come to life and become a little bit more interesting and organic already, just in terms of the way that it's moving, is by simply delaying some of the parts. What's important here is that you just establish which parts are moving first, which parts are responding to that movement. So I'm going to make the tail kind of be the secondary element. So I'm just going to delay the rotation of the entire ball, and I'm going to delay the tail itself as well, each by 1 frame. So these types of principles, like squash and stretch and follow through, really should be used, just to enhance what is already there. Don't rely too much on it, so don't overdo these things. They can very easily become quite gimmicky. Okay, and these things work a lot better when they're subtle. Okay, once you've squashed it, you might have to just go and readjust the position so that it's still touching the ground, and then just check out the timing as well. So make sure it doesn't squash before it hits the ground, and make sure it kind of returns back to its natural shape at the right time. You can simply copy and paste these keyframes, but adjust them at your own discretion. Okay, again, I'm going to add my easing. Okay, and I'm quite happy with how this is turning out, considering it is the third attempt. do want to add one more instance of squash and stretch right before it reaches the end of the little ledge there. I want to kind of make it look like it's hitting the brakes, so it kind of just squashes as it rotates over and stops itself. And I think that'll be a nice little touch. Okay, whenever you add or copy or paste keyframes, make sure that you go and check the easing. Okay, one final layer of movement that I'm going to add to this animation, which will dramatically enhance it, is I'm just going to make that tail bend a little bit as it kind of rotates and moves around, to give it the illusion that it's a little bit more organic, a little bit more floppy. So you can select your puppet pin tool, and by selecting it, you'll notice that you get this little pin icon, and you can click anywhere on that object to add points. Now, in order for the puppet pin tool to work, you need to have 3 points at least. Only having 2 points means that it doesn't know that it should pin to the body. Okay, so wherever you had your time slider and created those pins, that is where your puppet pin tool is going to add keyframes on your timeline. So I'm going to find those keyframes, and I'm just going to delete the one that is connected to the ball, because I'm not ever going to move this. I want it to stay connected at all times. And I'm only going to work with the middle one and the tip of the tail. And this part is very simple. All you do is find the places where the tail is rotating, and then use the puppet pin tool to emphasize that rotation. So if it's rotating upwards and over the ball, simply move the pins so that this movement becomes exaggerated. Same thing for the bottom. Whenever it hits the ground, I'm going to just bring those points down a little bit more. You'll notice that I'm using the rotation of the tail as a reference. Okay, a really good idea is to, every time you move the pins to a new location, copy and paste the very first keyframes that you had, so that it almost resets back to its kind of initial state. This makes it a lot easier to kind of avoid deforming the tail in weird ways, or losing track of where you are. Okay, one last thing I'm going to do is just add a couple of instances of follow through in the tail, and this would be nice to just kind of emphasize that follow through that we already had in place. tail is nice and bendy now, but still we can do a lot more to it to kind of get that that effect that we're going for. So what I'm going to do is select all those keyframes that I just made with the puppet pen tool, and I'm going to ease them by hitting F9. These ones are super straightforward to ease, just do basic in and out. Also following the same process step by step, whereby we move something, ease it, and then overlap. So we can repeat this for the tail, for the puppet pin in the tail. So once we've eased it, let's go and sequentially delay those parts. Notice it becomes really, really satisfying very quickly. Okay, so remember with the process that it's not a concrete thing, it's not the law. So you can do any of these in any sequence and you'll pretty much achieve the same result. The way I'm going to tackle the rest of the video, including the jump and the next landing, is I'm just going to apply that same principle. So if at this point you feel comfortable, you can stop watching, because all I'm going to do is repeat that same thinking. Okay, but I'm going to speed through the rest of the animation, so feel free to watch if you like. Otherwise, feel free to attempt this for yourself.